The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to once again speak to Bill 26, an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disabilities. We are so proud of this bill and have been overwhelmed by the responses of Albertans. Albertans who have said they have been calling for this change for decades and are finally seeing a government listen. Albertans who have said indexing will provide greater stability to their lives so that they can care for their children and plan for their future. And Albertans who have said far too long they have been stigmatized, made to beg for supports while politicians turn their back on them. I can't agree more. This change is absolutely overdue, and we are proud to bring it forward. The previous government did nothing in this regard for 44 years. They never indexed these supports, despite repeated calls from disability and anti-poverty advocates, and when oil was trading at $100 a barrel. Instead, they made Albertans beg for supports. They portrayed people who rely on these supports as fraudulent or undeserving. Just as the member from Calgary Hayes did when he called health care for people with disabilities giveaways. Or the leader of official opposition who has called for spending level in line with BC, which would mean a $500 reduction to people's AISH monthly benefit. The member opposite have shown a disregard for the right and dignity of people with disabilities, and our government will not support that. Instead, we are taking action to fight for these Albertans through this bill. Our proposed changes will support 250,000 Albertans with disabilities and low-income Albertans. They will provide greater stability and predictability for families and improve affordability. We have been overwhelmed by the positive response to this bill, and we are grateful to the thousands of Albertans, disability advocates, and anti-poverty advocates who have worked for these changes. Before I turn it over to my colleagues to speak, I do want to take a moment to respond to a few questions that came up during second reading. The member from Rocky Mountain House, Sundry, and member from Lacklebush, St. Paul, Two Hills raised a question about access to medications. I want to confirm that this bill will not change medication coverage for AISH clients. AISH will continue to provide prescription and non-prescription drug coverage from any Alberta pharmacy through the AISH Health Benefit Card. We are absolutely committed to protecting these important health benefits because we know how important they are to the people who count on AISH. The member for Lacklebush, St. Paul, Two Hills raised a question about the funding for this bill. We have shared this information from the beginning, but I can certainly share it again. We are committed to providing strong and stable funding for public services, including healthcare, education, and social services, while staying on our path to balance. This much-needed investment in Albertans and in our communities will be $46 million in 18-19 and $194 million in 19-20. The member from Vermilion, Lloyd Minister, also raised support for Albertans with service dogs. I'm pleased to address this, as this has been a priority for our government, and I also want to recognize the important advocacy of many Albertans, including Mr. Les Landry, who has been a strong advocate for this issue. As the member may know, for too many years, Albertans with disability, with PTSD, have had to deal with long wait lists. That is unacceptable. That is why in 2017, we made changes to increase Albertans' access to service dogs and cut down on wait times. Our changes allow more schools to train dogs, which give more Albertans opportunities to participate in their communities. Individuals with owner-trained dogs can also get their animal tested to become qualified. For Albertans on AISH with service animal, there is a monthly benefit available. This assists Albertan with the usual cost of caring for a service dog. To better support these Albertans, our bill proposes to index this benefit and other personal benefits as of January 1st. There was also a question about CPP. I mentioned this in my comments, and I'm pleased to speak to it again. We know there is much more work to do to address the issues the previous government neglected. We are very interested in hearing feedback from Albertans on this issue. We know there are concerns, and we are committed to exploring this issue and all other issues that matter to them with Albertans. We would like to look at this more fully and in the context of other exemption categories. We have heard from people that they want an opportunity to share feedback on this issue, and we are absolutely committed to doing that. The last thing I want to do before I wrap up is to speak to an amendment we are bringing forward. I would like to move this amendment on behalf of my colleague, the member for St. Albert. As mentioned during the Hanson Trust bill debate and in the second reading of this bill, we committed to looking at employment earning exemptions. We have done this work and are pleased to bring forward an increase to earning exemptions cap for Albertans who count on AISH. We know these earning exemptions are very important to Albertans. Employment provides a connection.
Honourable Minister, if I could just ask you to pause for a second and maybe distribute the amendment before you go ahead and explain it, that would be helpful to the House.
I can wait until it's distributed.
Yes. And then when she has a copy. When she has a copy. When she has a copy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was talking about employment. Employment provides a connection to community and allows people to have more money in their pockets. These exemptions have not been changed for many years. The amendment brought forward by member for St. Albert changes that. Employment exemptions will be increased as of January 1st. The full exemption maximum for a single person with no children will jump from $800 to $1,072, almost $300 increase. In addition, client can exempt 50% of employment income earned between $1,072 and $2,000 And single clients will therefore be able to exempt a total of up to $1,541 of employment income, which is an almost $400 increase. For families, full exemption maximum will jump to $2,612. Families can also exempt 50% of employment income earned between $2,612 and $3,349. Families will therefore be able to exempt a total of up to $2,981 of employment income. Going forward, the new income exemption threshold amounts would be increased in proportion with future increases to Alberta's minimum wage. In addition to this change, our amendment will increase passive business and spousal pension income exemptions to put more money in people's pockets. I'm very pleased that my colleague is bringing this forward, and I look forward to her speaking to this amendment in greater details later today. I also hope all members will be able to support this, and thank you, and I look forward to your comments and discussion in the House. Thank you.
The honourable member for, I'm doing it again.
It's okay, you're good.
Olmsted-Spruce Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak to the amendment. And I would like to thank the minister, as much as it pains me from time to time to do that. Oh, I spent most of the day thanking the Minister of Municipal Affairs, all sorts of stuff. It was off my, wasn't my best. For sending the amendment to my office prior to now. As you can see, Madam Chair, it is a significant amendment with significant ramifications. And I can't remember if it was on this particular piece of legislation or not, but I know from on occasion I have certainly made recommendations that we consult on legislation once it's introduced in the House. And one of the reasons why members of the official opposition continue to make this recommendation isn't just for fun, but because then these sort of amendments, large 6, 7, 8 page amendments, don't come before the Assembly and are asking the opposition to vote on an amendment on what in many cases is short notice. So I am grateful for the fact that we did have the opportunity to preview this amendment prior. But I think the point remains the same with respect to committee. One of the great things is that if we had have been at committee, we would have been able to discuss more fully why this amendment is needed. We could have heard from individuals, because I know, and I'm sure the member will remember, and I definitely know the member for Calgary-Curry will remember, that the last time that we discussed some of these very similar issues, members of the official opposition proposed amendments and made recommendations that are very similar to what is in this particular amendment. In fact, in a conversation that I had with the minister not that long ago, I had expressed some desire or an indication that the official opposition was in fact considering an amendment similar to the one that we have before us. It's not identical, and this particular amendment is a bit wider in its breadth than the one that we had prepared and were ready to move on behalf of individuals that are on AISH and would also like to earn income from jobs that won't have a negative impact on their AISH payment. And you'll know, Madam Speaker, that there is massive positive effects that can come from employment with those individuals who also receive AISH benefits. Both benefit to the individual as well as benefit to the economy. And it was the reason why initially that the members from the official opposition had recommended an amendment similar on previous legislation, because anytime that we can provide folks with more value, with more desire to strive, with more desire to be part of a wider economy, and to reward their efforts for that. It seems so strange that if folks are able and willing and it is possible for them to have a positive impact, that we would limit their potential. And so I certainly will be supporting this amendment. I encourage my colleagues of the official opposition to do so, just as, Madam Chair, I will be supporting the legislation, and I haven't had much of an opportunity as of yet to speak to that. I intend to do that a little bit later in debate, but on balance, this particular piece of legislation is going to make a great impact in the lives of many Albertans. And in particular, those who receive AISH benefits. I know one of my favorite constituents. Now, I know that that's a dangerous thing to say, Madam Chair, to single out any one constituent as your favorite. I didn't say the favorite. I said a favorite. So you can have more than one favorite. Trust me, if you have more than one child, you know that you can have more than one favorite. And her name is Christine. And she knows that during the legislative session, I'm in the outstanding constituency of Old Stittsbury Three Hills on every Friday. And so every Friday, Christine pops by the office. And she's also an AISH recipient, and she also, for the last 14 straight years, has worked at the A&W in Olds. And so she comes and sees me every Friday. And yes, I often see her at A&W as well, but in this particular case, she comes and sees me every Friday, and we have a chat about all sorts of stuff. She, for the record, really doesn't like the federal government. She's, generally speaking, not too keen on this government as well. But I gave her the news that she was going to receive a significant income should the legislation pass. And of course, I would never presuppose a decision of the Assembly, but I provided her the information that if the bill would pass, and I would expect that it would, that she would receive a significant increase in her AISH payment. And what an amazing difference it made to her. And she was so very excited about the things that she was going to be able to do now because of that. And then she was equally as excited when I had suggested to her that I was also going to try and increase the amount that she could work at A&W so that it would be an added incentive for her. That particular conversation took place prior to the conversation that I had with the minister, where I found out that he had too also decided that that would be a reasonable change to make at this point in time. So I know that she was very excited, and as are so many. I also appreciate the fact that the larger piece of legislation is going to be tied to CPI and try and depoliticize some of these sort of decisions that can be made by the Assembly from time to time. So with all that said, I encourage my colleagues to support the amendment and look forward to continuing to support the legislation as we move forward in the debate.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm very happy to speak to this amendment. amendment and actually provide a little bit of perspective to this amendment. Clearly, this amendment focuses on the people, some of the 55,000 Albertans who currently receive AISH. So there are currently 55,000 people that are on AISH, and a lot of those folks do work. So whether they work part-time, casually, some of them full-time, and they do that for a number of reasons that I'll get into. So it's really important not just to take the really bold step to index AISH benefits, but to also look at employment earnings. And I think tying those future changes to minimum wage was perfect because it was about employment. But again, what I'm going to speak to a little bit is I think it's really important to provide some perspective to how we got here. And for people with disabilities who are tuned in today, I want to speak directly to them and provide some important perspective. For the last 4 decades, until 2015, Albertans have been under the rule of one political party. Under that one party, supports for people with disabilities suffered the same fate as infrastructure, education, healthcare, and other social services. The reality of the Band-Aid solutions constantly being applied to gaping wounds got us to the place we arrived at in 2015, when Albertans chose a new way. The opposition has taken the position of late that they will soon resume their rightful place as the ruling party. So using that lens, I would like to remind Albertans with disabilities where we came from and how we've progressed over the last 3.5 years and how we got to this place today, Bill 26 in this amendment. In the 1990s, the Conservative mantra was cut first, ask questions later. As revenues from the oil and gas industry dropped more than 50%, the Conservatives instituted a 15% reduction in program spending over 6 years, while giving out $11 billion in subsidies to agriculture, oil, and gas. The Conservatives' cuts focused on healthcare, education, and social services. Between 1992 and 2000, the Conservatives cut 14,753 healthcare positions. As the international price of oil started to climb and the economy was showing signs of recovery, the Conservatives slowed that economic recovery. They slowed it by putting thousands of people out of work, overburdening social programs like AISH, and reducing the purchasing power of families. The Conservatives refused to invest in infrastructure, and we continue to deal with that deficit today. They made us more dependent on one resource, instituting a flat tax that literally took $2 billion out of government coffers. So why am I looking backwards? I wanted to provide a context to why this bill is so unique, so essential, and so important. And it took a lot of courage for us to do this and to arrive here today. During the Conservative focus on deficit reduction in the 90s, we saw the AISH program's failure to adjust to the cost of living, a failure to protect people with disabilities from the effects of inflation. In 1993, AISH was $810 per month. 4 years later, AISH was raised by $18. In 97, AISH was $818 a month. 2 years later, AISH was raised by $32. 6 years later, after that, it was raised by $338. Obviously, prices were good. Money was thrown at this program. In 2005, AISH was $1,188 per month. 7 years later, AISH was raised by $400. It seemed like a great win at the time, but the 7 years leading up to that were brutal. In 2012, that put AISH at $1,588, where it sat until today, or until now. Bill 26 proposes to do what no Conservative combination of government and leadership had the foresight or courage to do since the creation of AISH in 1979. Bill 26 ensures that Albertans with disabilities, their families and allies, will know that their AISH benefits will be adjusted to the Consumer Price Index. It's important to compare this change to the actions we know Conservatives have taken when the international price of oil creates economic hardship in an economy that has not yet diversified sufficiently to absorb the shocks of falling prices. that's not all. The legacy of decades of one-party rule, Conservative Party rule, created deficits within the AISH program that we are finally addressing. Let me remind you that AISH program provides over 50,000 Albertans with $1 billion in benefits. The UCP told Albertans that they would feel pain. The UCP crow about BC's spending levels, which are 20% lower than Albertans. Where do you think they're going to take us if they resume their rightful place? Imagine a 20% cut to AISH benefits. A 20% cut to $1 billion in AISH benefits is $200 million. What does a cut like that to AISH look like? If you use an annual benefit amount of $20,400, that translates to 9,800 AISH recipients. Add to that the cost of not funding intake. That means not supporting people who are newly eligible. Perhaps they're injured, or they move to Alberta, or they turn 18, and the deficit is massive. The problem is huge. While I appreciate that the opposition members will stand up and act supportive of supports for people with disabilities, remember their history and listen to their non-platform platform. It will hurt. They can tell you all they like about how much they support this amendment and this bill, but when it comes down to it, when the rubber meets the road, they will not vote for a budget that increases AISH benefits. In November of 2016, Alberta's Auditor General brilliantly outlined improvements to AISH that were long overdue, once again ignored by decades of a previous government. People with disabilities, their allies and families knew firsthand that the AISH application process was not easily accessed and was the opposite of user-friendly. I believe the Auditor General said the AISH application process was best suited for people good at filling out forms. That was the system created under the Conservative government. Finally, we're introducing changes that should have been made decades ago. The websites and links have been updated, tested, and revised. That's called consultation. The website is accessible from mobile devices. The AISH application is finally in plain language, and staff are being trained so that there is equity in decision-making. Applications for end-of-life care and for people who are already approved for PDD supports are shorter and simpler. Albertans who have applied for AISH benefits know eligibility processes were broken. They knew that. They knew for a long time. AISH application processing times are far too long, or were far too long. There was not sufficient processes in place to monitor processing times and practices. Information given at the denial phase was not consistent, and appeal panel decisions were not tracked. The huge number of very costly AISH decision appeals was an indicator of a broken system, and the previous government knew that, and they didn't do anything about that. We've now addressed these old deficits and have installed mechanisms to enable us to track and analyze processes. Alberta's Auditor General also told us that there were inadequate performance measures to monitor and report on the efficiency of the program, leaving us unable to monitor outcomes, identify gaps, and ultimately improve. And we've changed that. And that's where you see real progress, because we have a baseline. As we move forward, we will be able to make changes that matter. In 3.5 years, we've continued to pull this old system into the 21st century. It's important to acknowledge the progress made in the short 3.5 years. I acknowledge that the last 3.5 years have not been perfect, and I'm far from a patient person, and I would have liked it to happen a lot faster, but I am profoundly grateful that it is happening. There is a huge difference between our vision and the path forward and that of the UCP. They may not say much, but that says a lot.
Agreed.
The difference is one of going backwards while claiming it's the Alberta advantage, or one of continuing to consult and revise old systems while reaching for a future that embraces progress and inclusivity. That future began in 2015 when Albertans chose a government that would create a future that doesn't leave anyone behind. In 3.5 years, while trying to manage the worst recession in decades, we did not cut and fire, but began the process of addressing a system that was neglected, overburdened, and underfunded for decades. Over 50,000 Albertans who rely on AISH deserved better all along, and now they're getting it. A new vision and a path forward for AISH is what we are committed to doing, to improve the intake process and practice, to index and to increase AISH benefits, both the standard of living allowance and the modified living allowance, to maintain health-related personal benefits such as special diets, orthotics, equipment and maintenance of mobility aids, service animal supports, addiction-related expense, and special dietary needs, maintaining health benefits that are essential to people with disabilities, and amending employment earnings, exemptions, and indexing future rates to Alberta's minimum wage. This was a dream for many people with disabilities and their allies, and the fact that it's happening today is, I'm just so enormously grateful. Why is the support for employment so important? Well, I think the member touched on it a little earlier, but it is so important. First of all, let me say that our government proclaimed DEEM. I think it was last year, was the first year that we had ever done so. So we joined countries all over the world to focus on Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is in October. And we did that because there's an absolute value to affording and supporting somebody with a disability to be engaged in employment and to contribute to themselves, their families, and their communities through work. And it affords people dignity and inclusion and respect. We have to continue focusing on inclusive opportunities for people with disabilities beyond simply using a conservative tactic to do so. Think back a few years. The Conservative government decided to focus on employment for people with disabilities by cutting supports to people with disabilities through the PDD system. A wholesale cut was set to devastate the lives of people. Using an assessment tool, the old supports intensity scale, the Conservative government projected test scores to justify wholesale cuts to supports beyond simply targeting employment standards. That was when I met our Premier, Rachel Notley, and was inspired actually to run. Our response is much different. No more Band-Aids. It might take us a little longer to get there, but no more Band-Aids. We cleaned up some easy pieces that had been ignored for years, even during the good years. We finally removed the minimum wage exemption, where employers could apply to pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. We changed the Marriage Act so that people with disabilities no longer have to get a doctor's note before getting married. We paused the PDD safety standards and conducted an extensive two-phased review. I have never seen a review like that, and I've been to so many reviews and consultations, I can't even count them. We established a new standard for consultation and review in terms of the panel members, the process, and the result. It goes beyond plain language and access. It's about community. It's about leaders within the community. And it's about self-advocates and their families and their friends. And it's about listening. And I can tell you firsthand that's exactly what it was, because I was there for every step of it when we did the safety standards review. And what I can say is I traveled the province with that group, and not one opposition member showed up to any of those community consultations, and they were in your community. That process led to the PDD review that is underway today. The panel that has been appointed and the process is essential and it's groundbreaking. Service dogs. We addressed a huge need, a life-saving support. We addressed the need for additional dogs to support people. We addressed the high cost. Is there more to do? Absolutely. But we know it's a need, and we finally started talking about it. We talk about public information and awareness. It might just be a sticker on a business door, but it might just help one person. We've approved more service dog organizations, and now service dogs that may have been trained by their owners have the ability to be tested in order to obtain legal access. We have an associate page program right here in this chamber. that young people with disabilities can also apply to be a page and have a life-changing experience. We have a disability advocate. Private member bill, which became Government Bill 205, established an essential position and committed significant resources, once again, in a budget that the opposition, I can almost guarantee, will not vote for. Certainly it is not quite at the level of the Child and Youth Advocate, but it is a fantastic start. Think about the leader of the official opposition, whose friend in Ontario, whose sentences he finishes. What did they just do to the Child and Youth Advocate? I would also mention the Henson Trust legislation that was introduced, and I'll let another member speak to that because I know that's near and dear to his heart. But all of these changes have taken time and have required extensive resources. And in the 3.5 years, we have worked hard, and we know there is much to do still. Let me just say how happy I am that we are finally indexing AISH, increasing the minimum wage, increasing the wage exemption, and linking future changes to minimum wage. This takes courage and foresight that we are unique. Alberta is a leader in Canada for people with disabilities. I was at the Military Family Resource Centre not that long ago, and we were told St. Albert is home to a lot of military families, and we were told that many military families with members with disabilities specifically asked to be posted to Alberta because of the incredible level of support. And when they heard about the changes, of course, that just emphasized why. This is our Premier's leadership, and this is what we are committed to. When our Premier tells us that economic recovery is not complete until all Albertans are included in that recovery, I believe her because she walks the talk every day. Our commitment to indexing is evident, even when times are tough. It's not about austerity. It's about being brave enough to say nobody gets left. I'm looking forward to future conversations and consultation around other issues that are outstanding, some related to AISH and some not. But I know, based on the past 3.5 years, this government is not going to forget about people with disabilities and their allies. We're here every day doing the important work that we were sent here to do. We have much to talk about around cohabitating partners, around asset levels, and other clawbacks. There are very stark differences between our path forward for people with disabilities, our path forward, and the opposition's path forward. We are committed to continued consultation and progress, not austerity. Their actions to date show no commitment. In fact, their leader has said as much. We are committed to moving forward and building an inclusive future. The UCP want to return to the good old Klein days and the Alberta Advantage. We are committed to a future where no group of people is left behind, a future where a person with a disability is as important and as valued as a wealthy political donor or special interest group. That's the kind of Alberta we're building where nobody is left behind. So again, I thank everybody involved for getting us to this place, and I encourage all members to support this amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, Carson Taylor-Warner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a privilege to stand and speak a little bit about my support for this amendment to Bill 2026, an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disabilities. I just want to first of all say that it gets a little discouraging when it doesn't matter whether we support it or don't support it. The same rhetoric comes from the members opposite, which is that whether we support it, which is we believe that this is actually a fairly good common sense amendment, and that the bill was good, and that it's something that needs to be done. Yet here we hear once again how bad we are for accepting it, supporting it, and voting for it. And the answer from the opposite member is that don't trust us, that somehow we're supporting it for nefarious means. Madam Chair, I don't know how they can continue on the same path, the same rhetoric, and still think that Albertans are buying it. You can't say one thing out of both sides of your mouth and expect them to believe it. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing I wanted to say, Madam Chair, is that when the government portrays the past and decides that they're going to rewrite the past, I feel incumbent that upon me to stand and to clarify what's happened. When they talk about a failed 44 years, and then many of them have said how much they love Peter Lougheed, I hate to tell them this, but that happened in 44 years. So again, Albertans are confused by their message. It doesn't make sense. But let's just get back to this concept here that they're talking about. You know, the idea of these wraparound services. The wraparound services that we have in Alberta. I had a very interesting conversation while door knocking, talking to a teacher. And when I talked to the teacher, I'd like to be able to let you know what was said. I asked him if he was, what he thought about the government. He said, well, I think the government's doing a good job. I said, well, I'll take that to mean that you're going to vote for the next election. He said, yes. I said, well, why are you going to do that? He said, they're helping us. And so I wanted to dig a little deeper. Normally I just move on, but I wanted to dig a little deeper. So I said to him, well, my question to you is how much do you make? He says, I know what you're going to say. I know that I make more money than any other as a teacher than any other jurisdiction in Canada. I said, actually, no, you make more than any other jurisdiction in North America. I said, how did you get there? And so he thought, I got it. Collective bargaining, he said. And I said, wait, I appreciate that there's good collective bargaining amongst the ATA, but every other jurisdiction has collective bargaining units as well. So why did you make the money that you make in Alberta? And he kind of said, okay, why is it? And I said, the reason why is because a conservative government in the past actually helped public servants get to this point. Now, what's interesting about it, Madam Chair, is that this government likes to say how bad it was under a conservative government, but we have some of the top paid public servants because why? We did something different in Alberta. We had the thing called the Alberta Advantage, which this member just stood up and said how bad it was, how we want to go back to it. Absolutely, and every public servant should want to go back to it as well, Madam Chair, because the Alberta Advantage wasn't just helping private sector, it helped public sector as well. And when it's interesting that the members tried to have this revisionist history a lesson in this House, but the facts speak for themselves, Madam Chair. And so when we stand up and we say, we want to get back to something where we can have fulsome employment amongst Albertans, we can have an opportunity for Albertans to be able to really have something they can be proud of, that Alberta Advantage that's not just for private sector, but for public sector as well. This is something that we should crow about. This is something that we should be actually proud of in this province. And yet we have continued to hear from this side of the other side of the House that they are ashamed of the 44 years. We have done something right in this province, something phenomenal in this province, and we should never be ashamed of it, Madam Chair. Now, when we stand up in this House and we say, they got it right, instead of the government side standing up and saying, well, we agree. It's fantastic that we agree here, and taking the high road, raising the bar in this House, which we've tried to do. Still, it's amazing. The heckling, the laughing. I don't know if they're ever going to get it. I hope they do, because I think it just shows that they can be classy sometimes. But the sad thing about it is that when we actually do agree on a piece of legislation or amendment, and for them to get up and have this overheated rhetoric, it's discouraging, and I think that a lot of Albertans are looking at this saying, are they truly a government that we want to have another term of? And I can tell you, I've heard many, many times people say, thank you very much for raising the bar in this House. And I've said this before, I think that it's important for this government to be able to stand up and to raise the bar as well. we can have a policy debate. We can have a robust discussion. We can have a robust debate. But why does it always have to be couched in this overheated rhetoric and slamming? They only seem to know one speed, and that's anger. So we will support this. I think it's a very good amendment. And we are willing to support any good amendment that's going to help all Albertans in the future. But let's remember that how we got to this point was through a conservative government for 44 years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. I'm going to support the amendment on the floor, and I just want to extend my appreciation to the Minister of Community and Social Services because he is the first minister in this file in Alberta's history that is actually bringing forward indexation of these important social programs. The Conservatives had 44 years to do it, and they didn't do it. So what the honourable member on the other side was just talking about, that we should thank the Conservatives for their stewardship of this file, Madam Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. When times were tough in Alberta in the mid-90s, the Conservatives, the ones he is lauding, cut this program, cut programs for people on welfare supports, it was called then. They cut programs for people who were vulnerable. They cut programs for the families that needed our support as a government. They cut them, and they saved money. They said, we have to get back to balance, and we're doing it on the backs of the most vulnerable in this province. That's who he's lauding over there. That's who he's saying is providing the necessary importance of this program. Nothing could be further from the truth, Madam Speaker. I'm glad he's supporting this amendment. I'm glad that side's supporting this amendment. That's really great. But, you know, we don't see what they would actually do. We only hear what they would do. We hear things like, you know, healthcare is too expensive. We need to cut it 20% to match BC levels. And we know that that would affect the workers in the healthcare system, the nurses, the insurance, the valuable healthcare provision that is in this province would be cut as well. The programs, we know that people would get less service. That's what we know from the other side. We don't have a shadow budget from the other side, so we really don't know if they would support this should they come to power. We really know that what they would do from the things they have said they want to do, Madam Speaker, is cut programs and services, and this is an area where they would likely go to first, Madam Speaker, because the previous government, their legacy parties, did the same thing in the mid-90s on the backs of poor people. Madam Speaker, I want to go back to the actual work that this government and that Minister of Community and Social Services is doing. He has brought forward something that hasn't been done in this province before. In fact, I think he might have said only very few provinces have indexed the programs that we're going to index starting in 2019, Madam Speaker. And that is something that I can tell you will benefit thousands upon thousands of families in this province going into the future, Madam Speaker. We also know that the child care benefits, the child care benefit rates in some of those programs is going to be harmonized and be something that creates greater dignity, more support for young people in those families. Something, again, the previous government left undone, left to be corrected by this government, actually, because we actually put children and families first, even those who are experiencing difficult times, Madam Speaker. I often have said that the thing that brought me to politics, politicized me, if you will, was the cuts to important supports for people in this province in the mid-90s. And that was supported by all of Cabinet back then, but of course the Minister of Finance back then was the person who held the pen for those cuts. I'm proud as a Minister of Finance for this province, for this government, to hold the pen to make sure that that minister and ministry has the necessary supports for Albertans. I went to my very first protest. I've never, a young man growing up in Toronto, university, then came out here in the 80s, worked in helping people out, worked in helping networks in Calgary. The first time I got politicized was during those Klein cuts of the mid-90s and the effect it had on the people that I was trying to support, the women and children, the families that I was trying to support. And in 1993 or 4, I can't remember the exact date, I was on the steps here with 5,000 Albertans protesting those cuts. Many of them, of course, were clients of the system, of those programs and services, and they were here to say, you are cutting us back. We don't have the wherewithal to necessarily have the lobby support, the ability to raise funds to counteract. So we're coming out to do what we can do, and that is to be on the steps of the legislature and to say to their government at the time, we don't agree. We want you to roll back those cuts. That was not done, Madam Speaker. So that was 1993-4. And after that period of time, I said to myself, well, I'm going to get elected to help the most vulnerable. And in 1995, I got elected and served on council for 15 years. And my primary remit, the thing that I was most proud of and most interested in, is to try and improve the social programs in Alberta through my work as a city councillor. And one of the areas that I was really proud of working in to see some change was in FCSS, Family and Community Support Services, for all Albertans, that program for all Albertans. And that was held at about $60 million, maybe even less back then. And the government of the day, the Conservative governments of the day, did not increase that program to help preventative social services, to keep people off of income supports. They kept it at a amount of money, and a bunch of us formed a coalition. We said, we've got to lobby for increased funds for FCSS. And that minister, again, of community and social services, in our very first budget, argued that the FCSS program should be increased from $76 million to $101 million. And it has stayed at that level for 4 years, Madam Speaker. So as the honourable member from the other side talks about, how we should recognize the good work of the Conservative governments in the past, I can point to two things right there. They didn't increase FCSS, even though there was a coalition and everyone was saying this needs to go up to prevent people getting into poverty. They kept it at the level they kept it at, and finally, with this government, we increase it $25 million, and $100 million more has gone into that area since we were elected. We don't know what the other side would do. The other side hasn't brought forward a shadow budget. So though they say they support these amendments, they would support these improvements to the income support programs, I am loath to believe that.
Well,
because they vote against everything, Madam Speaker. They are saying they'll support this, but really we don't know. It's a bit of a shell game. So you will only know if they bring a shadow budget and they put their pen to paper and say, these are the things we can support. Who was it that said, don't tell me about what your values are. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what your values are. So though those folks are saying they value income support programs, they value support for low-income people throughout this province, and they support increases and they support indexing, show me your budget and then I'll tell you what you support. That's what I'll say, Madam Speaker. Just a point about, and I know the Minister of Community Social Services had talked about this earlier, just a point about the coalition, the interest this bill, his bill 26 has had with regard to combating poverty and fighting for Albertans with disabilities. I can tell you that my friends in the poverty reduction community across this province are so proud to finally see the recognition their efforts have achieved in terms of this government and this bill. We are doing things, Madam Speaker, to address poverty through the supports we're bringing forward. And another axiom, in addition to, I'll tell you what your values are by looking at your budget. Another axiom is poverty reduction is not only about money, Madam Speaker, but it involves money. And we are putting that money, we are putting that to the forefront with this bill. We are saying for far too long these amounts have been too low. They need to go up with inflation every year. Only a few provinces have done this, and we as a province believe in this value. You can look at our budget, Madam Speaker, and you can find out what we value. We value hardworking Albertans. We value supporting people who are vulnerable, supporting people who are trying to put their lives back together. And when they have difficulty, Madam Speaker, they should be able to count on their government. On this side of the House, they can count on their government. That side of the House is all talk. They have no shadow budget. Until they bring forward something that looks like a shadow budget, we can assume that they're only playing politics, Madam Speaker. That's what they're doing. So really, though they're talking about supporting this amendment, supporting these initiatives, I know on the next breath, they will get up and say, this government is reckless. Well, Madam Speaker, we are supporting Albertans. Doesn't matter what they say. They need a shadow budget. Until they do that, really, it's all talk.
Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A1? The Honourable Member for Calgary Southeast.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to say a couple of things. I'll be supporting this amendment. And I'd also like to thank the member from St. Albert for her incredible work that she's done on this, because I know that she's worked very hard on behalf of that community, not just today, but I think for most of her life. And I'll commend the Minister for making indexing incomes instead of it being a regulation, that now it's legislation. But Madam Chair, it is always interesting to me, and I have sat in this chamber now for almost 7 years. And I too, like some of the members, like the Minister of Finance, got politically involved because I saw places where we needed to change. We needed to evolve, not just as a government, but we needed to evolve as a people in this province. One of the sayings that I tell grade 6 kids, one of the questions I ask them, what is the greatest invention ever created? And they say things like hockey, and some say oil or cell phones. But I say, well, what about the caveman and the stone wheel? They're like, oh yeah, right. And then I ask them, I go, well, did we ever run out of rock? And they go, no, look at the mountains. We have tons and tons of rock, but guess what? Times changed. And I said, well, what do they make wheels and tires out of now? Completely different things. I'm a bit disturbed when I hear Minister of Finance and Minister of the Crown basically in a roundabout way, basically defame people that I know have sat in the Office of Human Services that have given their blood, sweat, and tears. The Honourable former Premier, Dave Hancock, and a dear friend of mine, the Honourable Manmeet Buller. It is disgraceful to think that those two people did not work tirelessly on behalf of Albertans. Now I'll say this, and this is maybe something that we don't hear enough in this chamber. Yes, I was elected as a progressive conservative in 2012, and whatever that government did of the day, and whatever that government did in the past, I am happy to wear it all. Because if you're going to blame the former government, then you had better thank the former government for a lot of the very good things that happened in this province. And there's a saying, pride cometh before the fall. But while you've done an excellent job on this particular file, there are other places in your government where you just don't have it right yet. And if you think you have it right, well, then I'll go back to that saying, pride cometh before the fall. Because as progressive conservatives, we certainly didn't have it right. When I sat as the Minister of the Crown, or even as an MLA, as a father, as a human being, as an Albertan, I don't always get it right. But I continue to work hard to refine myself, to refine my thoughts. And I think Manmeet Buller was on that path. And I dare somebody in this chamber to deny that. Trying to get to a place on a very, very complex file, and I'll say this as a paramedic on the street, when you want to see people in crisis with different issues, and then you hear about their stories about AISH and income supports, and how people, not only, how they disrespect them because of the place they are in their lives. It is absolutely unacceptable. So I'm glad that we are getting, particularly on this particular file, where we're getting it more and more right, where we're actually having a debate and where people are accepting amendments. That's what we should be doing in here. We should be trying to get to a place where both sides have some credibility on this issue. There is nobody, look, I left the United Conservative Party, but I know many of the people there, if not all of them on this particular file, absolutely do care. Their way to get there might be different, but I know they care. I know the Alberta Party caucus cares. I know the member from Calgary, McCain-O'S Hill, has done a lot of work on this particular file, and she should be commended. But it's pretty easy in this chamber to find the grounds where we have common ground, and I believe this is one of them. And to have a respectful debate rather than blaming, nobody comes to this chamber without a goal, I don't think. There might be a few that have the wrong intentions. But I just, when we think about Peter Lougheed, Don Getty, each premier, each government has contributed in some way, some good and some bad. And that's just the reality. But our job in here is to have respectful debate, to stand on the records that we have. Madam Chair, I'll tell you one of the things that certainly, when we did the consultations on this particular file, and I'm going to say a couple things in this chamber that some people might be surprised of. I've had the opportunity to go to some of those things, and you absolutely feel heart-wrenched. You recognize that in that particular community, there are people over the years have been great advocates for their children and or the people that they're in care of or caring for, where they were great advocates and they were able to get more money. But yet somebody who had more severe disabilities who didn't have a great advocate was getting less, and you saw them fall through the cracks. We tried to address that. But I'll tell you some things, again, when I look around the province, whether visiting my father in a rural hospital, I have to tell you, I'm absolutely embarrassed that a government of 44 years that I was a part of, that some of the facilities look like that. I can say that. That's responsibility. That's, and I'm not asking for any credit. But it's stuff that we need to continue to work on. This particular file, like I said, is very complex, and this is not going to end. I don't care who forms the next government. If you think that you've got it down and the next government that forms government, whoever it may be, think that this is going to be an easy file, it's not going away. There are going to continue to be issues. So, another time, visiting a mental health facility, and walking in there and going, hold on a minute. We're one of the richest provinces in the world, and this is what this place looks like? This is the conditions we're asking mental health professionals to help our children and our loved ones, and this is what we've given them? Well, all due respect to the government, you've been there for 3.5 years, and these facilities still look the same way. And I'm not blaming anybody. What I'm stating, Madam Chair, is that running a province, running the government is very, very complex. Everybody has a different approach. But we would be better served and more well served if we were actually collaborating on these particular issues. And I'll say it again, the government has done some good things. Everything the United Conservative Party talks about in trying to tighten the belts of our fiscal responsibility are not all wrong. The amendments that the Alberta Party caucus and some of the independents. When we start looking at each other as fellow Albertans, and remember this, if you are the government and you're there to govern everybody, are you not there to try to govern us and be respectful as us as taxpayers and vice versa? There is an opportunity whenever an election is called and as we continue to go, and whether Albertans feel I'm fit enough to come back to this chamber or not, there's an opportunity moving forward for members that do get reelected and whoever forms government to start elevating the debate in this province to deal with files like this, where there are people suffering, and you know, some of these people and the things that they feel that they have to resort to get the money that they need is just, again, I've seen it on the ambulance, and it's despicable that we stand here and we argue about some of the petty things and who's to blame. Madam Chair, I just think if we were to collaborate more and be open to some ideas and not blame and say that the other side is always wrong because they're not, then I think, Madam Chair, we'd be far better off. Because isn't our goal at the end of the day, I should be trying to help support this minister even though I sit in the opposition benches with the Alberta Party, to try to give him my best ideas, or the Deputy Premier on the file of health, or the Minister of Justice. That's how I can best serve Albertans rather than my own political interests. So, Madam Chair, I'll leave it there, but I will be supporting these amendments and I look forward to further debate. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Carson Taber-Warner.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify a couple of things. First of all, in terms of this bill, I have a brother who was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, so he had brittle bone disease. And by the time he was, I think, in grade 6, he had spent more time outside of school than in, and had to be tutored and homeschooled so that he could keep up. It has been a devastating disability for him. He had big heart, big ideas, but his body wouldn't keep up. And so, you know, I speak very passionately about this, and I believe that it needed to be indexed for some time. And I was never in a position where I could advocate for that. I'm now in a position where I can advocate for it, and I want to be able to do that. Because I've seen the face of an individual of our society, a close person to me, my brother, who has been affected. You know, the heckling at this point is so unclassy, very unclassy, and I'm amazed that I'm sharing my heart here, telling about why I feel the value of this, and a member from the opposite cannot stop to heckle. Unclassy, absolutely unclassy. But let me get back to this point. The point here is this, is that I believe that society has two parts. They have the heart and the head. And the heart is those wraparound services for someone like my brother who, at no fault of his own, is in a situation where he needs to have that hand up. He has tried where he can to be able to get the work that he can do and that his body will allow him to do. But as I've watched him, and we're very close in age, as I've watched him, I've recognized that it's very difficult for him. And that we need to be able to, as a compassionate society, be able to have those wraparound services for him. So I believe that in this situation that this is a good program for him, and I think that this will help him. And this is why I personally am voting in favor of this amendment and in favor of this bill, because I believe it is the right thing to do, not just for my brother, but for the people that are struggling just like my brother has. But I want to just finish with this. There was an article in the Tyee that's from BC. It says, "Jump in Alberta disability benefits leaves BC far behind." And I can't go through it all because we don't have the time, but it basically goes on to say that BC would have liked to have followed this, the direction that Alberta is taking, to be able to increase these the AISH payments, but they couldn't. And the number one reason why they couldn't is because they were so far in debt. The cost to service the debt prohibited them from being able to make those kind of decisions for the people of BC. And as you know, the Tyee is not a conservative magazine. They are just calling out the truth. The reality is that Alberta had gotten us into a position where we had that ability to be compassionate, to be able to increase those AISH payments. And there were many people that were able to benefit in Alberta for it. In fact, in this article, it goes on to say that many people from BC wanted to move to Alberta in order to be able to be involved in that AISH program and how compassionate it was. So that was the point I was trying to make earlier about what some of the decisions we made here in Alberta that allowed us to be able to have that benefit, not just the benefit to private sector, public sector, but to actually benefit and to be able to provide a compassionate side. That's what I think is valuable, and this is something that I think is a big reason why I am very much in favor of this amendment, and just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to rise to ask the Honourable Member a question. I apologize that I spoke out of turn. I know sometimes in committee, sometimes people speak back and forth, and I perhaps took that a little bit too far. It obviously wasn't intended as a heckle, so I'll simply stand and state my question on the record for the Honourable Member. What I asked was, and it's simply because this is one of the things that made me passionate and drove me into government, was the idea that ultimately our budget does signal what our values are. And so what I was simply asking was, this bill does a fantastic thing. I'm very proud of the thing that this bill does, but it does cost a certain amount of money. And so simply what I wanted to ask the Honourable Member opposite, since he feels so passionately about it, and I think we found a point of agreement, is whether or not he intends to vote for the money in the budget to support this bill.
Honourable Member for Calgary-McKay-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm hoping that we can change the tone of the conversation, because this is a really good bill and it helps a lot of people, and this is a really good amendment that makes a bill even better. I'm really pleased to see a lot of the changes that this amendment introduces to the legislation. I think they're really important changes. Indexing of income, as you know, I introduced an amendment last spring to try and achieve a very similar goal to that. I think it's really important. I want to thank the Minister for being so open with information, and also the member from St. Albert. She's been a huge educator for me to learn more about this particular issue, and I really want to acknowledge her contribution, both to me but to the sector at large. It's been really important. I do have a sub-amendment that I'd like to introduce, and yeah.
Known as Sub-Amendment 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I'd like to move that Amendment A1 to Bill 26, an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disability, be amended as follows. A, Part A is amended A by renumbering Clause A as Clause A1 and by adding the following before Clause A1. A, in the proposed section 3, by adding the following after subsection 2, 3, the provision and administration of benefits provided under this section shall be carried out in accordance with a client bill of rights established by the regulations. 4, a client bill of rights established pursuant to subsection 3 shall A, include a requirement for the provisions of the Bill of Rights to be considered and applied by all persons authorized to administer and make determinations respecting benefits under this section, including eligibility for benefits. B, provide that access and education regarding services and benefits should be culturally appropriate. C, provide that clients and individuals applying for benefits must have access to supports to assist in navigating the application and appeal process. D, require that, upon request, an explanation of an appeal decision be provided to a person who was refused a benefit. E, be reviewed by the minister and any impacted groups every 5 years, beginning 5 years after the date on which the Bill of Rights comes into effect. B, by adding the following after Clause D. E, by adding the following after the proposed section 3.3. Consultation 3.4. The minister shall, in accordance with the regulations, consult with any groups potentially impacted by proposed amendments to this act or the regulations that would substantively change a benefit or the manner of determining eligibility for a benefit. B, Part B is struck out and the following is substituted. Section B, Section 2.5 is amended. A, in Clause A, by adding the following after the proposed section 12.1, A4, A5, establishing a client bill of rights in accordance with section 3.3 and 4. B, by adding the following after clause A. A1, by repealing clause C. C, by adding the following after clause B. B1, by adding the following after clause D1. D2, respecting the requirement for consultation under section 3.4 with groups impacted by any substantive changes to benefits. It's too bad we can't use visual aids because that's quite an exercise in logic right there. But the reason that I introduced a sub-amendment is because the amendment opened up the clauses that need to be addressed in order to entrench a client bill of rights and in order to entrench a requirement for consultation in the future for any changes. And the client bill of rights came about because of conversations in my office with clients who are applying for AISH and appealing decisions from AISH. I think it's important that each of the clients of AISH understand either why they were turned down or how they can go about appealing the process, and they need to know what the standard of service is that they can expect consistently, regardless of what worker they may be working with. And then the second part of the sub-amendment has to do with consultation. And the reason that I wanted to incorporate that into the bill is because what I hear from the PWD community again and again is nothing about us without us. And this entrenches that into the legislation. And I'm sure all of us have had people dealing with AISH in our offices and seen the frustration, felt the pain that they have felt in dealing with what their circumstances are and dealing with the AISH program. And this sub-amendment, these issues are dealt with in the sub-amendment, I think in a compassionate way. I really believe that this sub-amendment makes the amendment better and the amendment makes the bill better. And for these reasons, I really encourage everybody in the House to support this sub-amendment. Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Member, for bringing forward this sub-amendment. With respect to some of the things that are mentioned in the proposal for Bill of Rights, for instance, that there need to be better clarity with respect to eligibility of the benefits. Individuals who are applying, they need to better understand the procedures. After that Auditor General's report came out, we came with a AISH action plan. And many of the things that are included here are somewhat addressed in that as well. For instance, we created new simple language forms, and along with that, there we created 3 more guides as well. One of them was explaining, for instance, what this program is about, who is eligible in very simple language. And the other guide was talking about essentially every clause, every step of the way, what information is sought in that form, and explaining what is expected and what is needed. So there were many things addressed there. There was also an adjudicative framework that was part of that action plan as well, to make sure that the decisions are consistent across the province. Also, there was a recommendation with respect to increased individualized support for individuals who are applying for those benefits, and with respect to that, improvements were also made. And then I think in bringing forward this piece of legislation, we talked to thousands of self-advocates, anti-poverty advocates, persons with disabilities, their families, and I can even name certain groups like Disability Action Hall, Vibrant Communities Calgary, End Poverty Edmonton, Edmonton Social Planning Council, Inclusion Alberta, Public Interest Alberta, Self-Advocacy Federation, Momentum, YWCA, Calgary Housing Company, Poverty Talks in Calgary, and I was meeting earlier even when End Poverty Edmonton as well. So what I want to say that for most part, pretty much what we did, that we worked with the community on all these issues. And the reason we did that we believed in the nothing about us without us. So it's important that we consult them when we make any changes to this legislation, to the programs that affect them, and things that are included in these amendments were advocated by many of these advocates, and we received almost over 2,300 letters. So I would, I guess, ask a little bit for more clarity that have member consulted with the community on any of these amendments, and what were, I guess, those discussions. Does she have anything more to share? And if not, I think I will take time to consult on these issues. I recognize these are important issues, but at this point, unless I have something substantial, I would urge my colleagues not to support this amendment at this time.
Any other members wishing to speak to the sub-amendment? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor of sub-amendment 1 to amendment A1, say aye. Any opposed, say no. No. That is defeated. You're back. We have a division. Honourable members, we have a division on sub-amendment 1 to amendment 1 to Bill 26. All those in favor of this sub-amendment, please stand.
Mr. Strankman, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Godfrey, Mr. Fraser, Member McPherson, Ms. Goodrich, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Orr, Mr. Fildebrand, Ms. Luff.
All those opposed, please stand.
The Honourable Ms. Jansen, the Honourable Mr. Fian, the Honourable Mr. Carlier, the Honourable Minister McQuaig-Boyd, the Honourable Mr. Billis, the Honourable Ms. Ganley, the Honourable Minister Mason, the Honourable Mr. Ceci, the Honourable Minister Hoffman, the Honourable Mr. Sabier, the Honourable Minister Larrabee, the Honourable Minister Miranda, the Honourable Ms. Gray, Mr. Coulihan, Ms. Payne, Ms. Littlewood, Member Cortez Vargas, the Honourable Mr. Schmidt, the Honourable Mr. Malkinson, the Honourable Mr. S. Anderson, Ms. Goring, Ms. Miller, Mr. Hinckley, Ms. Woolard, Mr. Kleinstuber, Mr. Dang, Member Drever, Member Turner, Mrs. Schreiner, Member Connolly, Member Loyola, Ms. Renault, Mr. Dack, Ms. Fitzpatrick, Member Carson, Ms. Chasm, Mr. Horn.
Madam Chair, total for the sub-amendment 12, total against 37.
That sub-amendment is defeated. Back on Amendment A1, are there any further speakers to this amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of Amendment A1 to Bill 26, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That amendment is carried. Are there any further questions, comments, or amendments with respect to Bill 26? Are you ready for the question? On the remaining clauses of Bill 26, are you agreed? Are you opposed? That's carried. On the title and preamble, are you agreed? Opposed? That's carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Opposed? That's carried.